Okay, looks like we're up to 80. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. This is the second webinar for the safety planning with Kristen Carmichael. And some of you attended the first registration, and that webinar is recorded, so if you missed it, I can send it to you afterwards, so no worries on that. This is a follow-up after the first one, and so this will also be recorded if you need it as well. I wanted to introduce you guys today to Kristen Carmichael. She is a subject matter expert on domestic violence and safety planning. Kristen is a former domestic violence shelter director and healthcare executive, now operating Carmichael Consultants. She's amazing. If you missed the first webinar, like I stated, it is recorded, and it was absolutely amazing. We've gotten really good feedback on that, but we welcome you to the second one. And so we will be having questions, and you can go ahead and put that into the chat. And I'm gonna hand this over to Kristen Carmichael.
Terrific. Thank you, Teresa, and thank you for all your help. I echo what Lydia put into the chat box of thanks to the tech people.
Right.
And unfortunately, I can't see all your faces today, so I am presenting to my computer. So it's really helpful, and it was super helpful in the first session when folks would use the chat box. So use the chat box to share your thoughts. If you have any questions, we have a lot of material today, but there will be time for your questions. Hopefully as many as you have, but we'll have to get through it and see. I even hope to have a little time at the end for us to be able to share information. I have worked in domestic violence for an awfully long time, but I recognize that there's a lot of you in the audience who know more about this than I do. So I think the way we can make this as rich for everyone involved is by sharing our information together via the chat box. What else? Yeah, I am super honored to be here today talking to you about safety planning. I am really excited about it. I love safety planning. I know that's kind of an odd thing to say, but I feel like it offers such an opportunity to partner with survivors and to kind of flip the script. So where the offender maybe was working to take away their power, safety planning can be a very empowering experience where the survivor gets to reverse the roles, and instead of being reactive to what the offender is bringing their way, they can be proactive about how they want to defend against those strategies, what they'd like their life to look like, and how they can best be supported in doing that. So we did already have a first session. We went over a bunch of material, particularly around what traditional safety planning options tend to get used with survivors of domestic violence. And so it's kind of the greatest hits of what we recycle as far as safety strategies, and decoding, what about those traditional safety planning strategies are helpful, and maybe some of the ones that, at one time someone thought it was a helpful strategy, but maybe not so much. So we really got a chance to analyze those a little bit. And think about in what situations they might still apply and what situations they may not be so great. So strategies that I'm sure we've all used probably at one time or another, like calling the police or calling 911, packing a bag, using a code word. A strategy that we talked about that I'm not a big fan of are the ones where they talk about working with survivors to know what rooms in the house they should be in when there might be a physical assault. And again, that's a problematic one in my mind. But some others that may also be helpful, but again, in what circumstances? And one other thing we talked about in the first session is how you're setting the stage for your safety planning. So kind of what is your responsibility to bring your best self to the safety planning session, how do we look to regulate our nervous system in these really kind of difficult times with the additional stress of having a public health emergency on top of what can already be a pretty charged situation. You know, how do we regulate ourselves and kind of be curious and creative and thoughtful and reflective about our safety planning, and really put ourselves in a situation where the client in some ways can borrow our nervous system if they're really kind of out of whack, out of balance, dysregulated, as one might anticipate. How do we make that safe space for them so that we can indeed partner and create the kind of safety plan that's actually very useful, and again, that flips the script and puts that survivor back in charge of their power, back in charge of their life, back in charge of their safety. So really productive first session. Like Teresa said, there'll be a recording of that available to you. For the second session, we're going to be pushing ourselves to look at 5 different ways in particular that we can expand our understanding of safety planning, really some different frameworks that you can use when you're doing safety planning with survivors, and some concrete strategies that you can be suggesting. You know, one of the things we talked about was just, you know, I've worked in organizations before where there's like a list of 10 safety strategies, and we're kind of using them wholesale with whatever survivors we're working with. And I find that kind of safety planning problematic on a number of levels, but it really encourages us to kind of put a square peg in a round hole. And each survivor has a different story, has a different inclination to use certain strategies or not, and different reasons for that. And so how can we get away from those really standardized safety plans where you just like fill in the blank with them, and really do something super customized and super relevant, particularly during this time when we have this pandemic going on. So that's my goal for this second session. And again, really appreciate folks who are willing to share in the chat box. And I think let's get the ball rolling here. So let's see, I'm gonna get you to where we are in the second session. Now this is a little bit of material we went over at the very end of session 1. And so for those of you who were in session 1, if you'll just give me 5 to 10 minutes to get folks caught up to where you are, that would be greatly appreciated. This is the first kind of real improvement that I can see that folks can make to their safety planning, other than understanding how traditional safety planning is at times good and at times not particularly helpful. So I'm calling these the golden rules of safety planning. And these are just some things to keep in mind no matter what, essentially. So whether you're safety planning with a survivor who has left their offender, or if you're safety planning with a survivor who's still in that space with the person who abuses them, these things work. And I think these things are the foundation for how you can construct relevant safety planning. And so the first is just recognizing that this is a partnership. I know when I was a younger case manager, I went into social work initially because I wanted to be helpful. And as I gained some knowledge, I think I overestimated what my role was in safety planning and really in intervening with folks who have domestic violence. And so this is cautionary if you were anything like I was, in that recognizing what our part in safety planning is, what we own, what's ours to own, and what is really the client's to own, and knowing that when we confuse those two things, we do harm to ourselves and potentially to our client too. So my responsibility is to bring a good balanced nervous system, a calm person into that safety planning session, and to be able to kind of be creative and curious. I think curiosity is the cure for judgment. So being curious about why my client might be making a certain choice or picking a certain safety strategy over another, or having some reluctance maybe. If I can stay in that place of curiosity versus judgment, that's really important. And then providing that safe space. So a safe space can look different to different clients. You know, it could be a really comfy couch in a nice quiet room where you can do your safety planning. For some clients who maybe are really struggling and feeling a lot of anxiety, going on a walk and getting out in the sunshine may help. For another client, it could be that having them do some deep breathing, maybe before the safety planning session and during the safety planning session, or even having them coloring in a coloring book while you're doing the safety planning. I mean, there's a lot of ways that we can work with clients so that it is a partnership and we're offering them the kind of emotional support they need to be able to participate fully and in a meaningful way with us. Second piece of this is it's our place and our part is to listen, and really to do more listening than talking, which is difficult for me, but and other people are really good at the listening component and maybe not so good at the interjecting component, so there is a balance there. But that's the thing that ensures that what you have to offer is client-centered and culturally competent. If you're not really listening to your client and really hearing what they have to say, it's awfully easy to think from our frame of reference and to think about what we would do in a certain situation and not be able to put ourselves into the survivor's shoes. So listening is your first line of defense in being humble and in building a bridge to where your client is, as opposed to speaking from where you are, which can get you in trouble. So it's also our part to offer connection, options, information, hope, and creativity. And maybe of all of that, I think that connection piece is so important. And that's spoken to in the fourth bullet point too, which is to enhance the healing relationship. By the end of your safety planning session, your connection to your client should have grown stronger. You should have a stronger bond. If you have a weaker bond by the end of your safety planning session, something went off the rails. So whatever that looks like, so that you stay allied with the client, you stay on their team, it doesn't become contentious. It doesn't mean that you don't at times hold up a mirror for that client or share your expertise. That is also very important. But again, the relationship with your client is primary, because whether or not your safety strategies work, certainly you hope they do work, but whether they work or not is not as important as if that client feels a connection with you and feels like you are a place where they can go for further support and maybe further safety planning. You know, if you do safety planning correctly, it's something that you continue through conversation. It's not a one and done. I did the safety plan, I checked the box, I'm done. And I know for some organizations, you are compelled to do a safety plan, and that it can feel like something that's put upon you and the client, oftentimes at a time where there's an awful lot going on. So that can be very difficult. But how do you maybe reframe that in such a way that hopefully this is a possibility for you to grow that connection with your client, and again, let them kind of shift who they've been in the relationship and become really proactive about themselves and what they're worth and their safety and that of their children. Anyway, so that's kind of your piece in this. What's not your piece and what you don't own, and what's really difficult, I think, not to try to own, is picking the safety strategies. Maybe particularly because you might have seen what happens with clients 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, and have a very good idea about what you think would work in a certain situation. But for us, again, not to take over what is ultimately the client's choice and decision and consequence, and really stay in that place of just informing and giving choice and caring, I think is super important to producing really quality safety planning. And then kind of this last piece on this slide is just knowing that safety planning evolves over time. So it's, we cannot promise our clients that we will keep them 100% safe, and that any one strategy will work in every circumstance. But having the ability and the kind of relationship necessary to have a survivor maybe try a few of the options that we're presenting or that they come up with on their own, even better, and then assess and see what's working and what's not working and move on to the next strategy, is really a beautiful evolution of the relationship and of safety planning, the safety planning itself. All right, so I'm gonna just stop for a second, make sure we're all still on the same page. Everything's going all right. Any questions? Okay, and I'm sorry, I know this was review for the folks in the first session, but I didn't want folks in the second session to miss it. And so now we're gonna get onto a slide that I didn't get much time to spend on last session. And these are really good, again, things to think about across your safety planning. One is that when you think about what kind of safety strategies you're going to choose, it can be very helpful to know that past is prologue. So what an offender has done before is what they will likely do again. You know, human beings are creatures of habit. And so if an offender feels comfortable or has seen success using certain strategies in the past, oftentimes they will try them again. Now, this is true whether or not the survivor has left the relationship. So if an offender has created some competency for themselves around using financial abuse or using child abuse or making certain threats, by talking to a survivor, we can elicit what those behaviors were and make some predictions about what the future might look like. Survivors know offenders very well, and oftentimes have instincts about those things that offenders will continue to do. And if this is a survivor who has left their offender, there's the chance that they've left them before. On average, survivors leave offenders 7 times. That's what data tells us. Now, that's not the most or the least. Oh goodness, it looks like Norma's not seeing any of the slides. I hope that the rest of you are seeing slides. Will you give me a why if you're seeing slides? Okay, so Norma, I think it is you on this one. I'm not sure if Teresa can help you. Thank you. I'm getting lots of whys. Thank you all so much. Uh-oh, Kira isn't seeing slides either. Not sure. I'm going to continue forward. You should have received the PowerPoint from Teresa in your email. So if you'll open up your PowerPoint from your email, I may be able to cue you what slides I'm on until we get this resolved. So let's try that as a strategy for you few who are not seeing the slides. I hope that you received the PowerPoint in your email. And it looks like Candace did not get the PowerPoint. So we're going to do our best we can to catch you up. But I hesitate to pause because we have an awful lot of folks who are seeing slides. So hang in there. And if worse comes to worse and we have to get you the video, we will do that. Okay. So let's see. What has the offender done in the past? How is that predictive of what they might do in the future? What specific threats has the offender made in the past? Is the threat, I will come to your office and I will get you, or I will divorce you, or I will take the kids, or I will clean out the bank account? I mean, it is very common that there is a threat, but what specific threat? I mean, that certainly gives you some good information to go on as far as what you would safety plan toward. And then this question of what does the survivor believe will come next? Again, survivors have lived through this. Oftentimes they've left before, and they know kind of the general patterns that tend to occur. So if you can have this conversation, many times they will say, I know in my heart of hearts that this is likely to happen. Now, there are other things that they will not be able to predict. But when they say, I really believe he or she will do X, well, let's look at that. Let's take a minute and let's think about what it would take for you to be safe from X. Okay. And so now we're going to talk about the second component, which is some of the most common strategies for safety planning, and they are effective, have to do with one of the next three things. Either A, cutting off access, so figuring out how the survivor cannot be at that place where the offender is going to try to find them, or B, cutting off communication. So how can we put some barriers in place to prevent the survivor from being interrupted by the offender over and over and over again? And sometimes that's more possible than other times. I mean, there are times where there are kids in common or other things that may prevent a full cut in communication. But how do we make it to where that survivor is not interrupted 10 times a day by the knowledge that their offender is trying to contact them or by actual offender contact? It's really important to help create space and peace of mind and a chance for a survivor to start to mend within themselves. The last piece is increased support and connection. I like to say connection equals protection. And that connection could be counseling. That connection could be with friends and family. That connection could be a hobby. That connection could be, potentially with another survivor if they're in a shelter situation. It could be with a spiritual care person. It could be anything that you can come up with that helps connect that individual to someone that will care about them. That can make an incredible difference in helping a survivor move from a really vulnerable state to a more protected state. So those are some pretty common strategies across the board that can be used. And then this last piece, which is part of the golden rules, is really, again, this piece about what is yours within this relationship and within safety planning and what isn't, and you not taking on those things that are above and beyond what you own in the process. And then remembering, and I know this is probably something you already know, but just remembering that if a survivor is to stay gone from their offender, if they make that choice, it's as a result of them making that choice and them being supported to make that choice. It's not going to happen because it's what we deeply desire or because of what we think is best, or even because we produce the perfect safety plan. I think our goal within safety planning is to forward our healing relationship with the client and potentially to help them think of or be informed about some things that they wouldn't have known without us. And that's a very important role, but it stops there. And I think that's good for us to remember so that we don't get into taking over the safety planning from our clients. I hope that makes sense. Okay. So these are some COVID-19 specific safety planning recommendations. With us being in this kind of certain place and time, there are some things that I feel like are going to work better than other things. So not relying on the idea that all survivors will feel safe coming into shelter. We did a poll at the beginning of session 1, and within that session, about 25% of participants said they had seen a large increase in the desire for shelter services. About 25% said they had seen a small increase in demand. Another 25% said they'd seen a small or large decrease in shelter seeking. And then the final 25%, I hope we're adding up to 100%, said that there had really not been a significant change in how people were seeking their services specific to shelters. And I know we have a lot of folks on this webinar who are not shelter workers, but I think understanding that across the state, there's a lot of variability in how folks are feeling about seeking shelter, maybe in large part because of exposure to the virus and also exposure to their offenders being home 24/7. So some of the things we might have said to a survivor on a crisis call in the past, like, just come into shelter, we'll help you out. We should still be welcoming them into shelter, but there may be some hesitation there. And so how do we resource ourselves to know how to work better with survivors who are not going to be able to leave their offender during this time? And I've got some strategies to kind of suggest to you that are coming up in the PowerPoint. Next on the list, making sure to update your resource list. There are some resources that aren't being offered anymore, some bus routes that are getting cut. And so making sure that you're offering resources that are still in existence to survivors. The potential for your organization to offer digital communication. So whether that's via a text or chat or a audio video platform like Zoom, but making sure that you can have that contact with survivors during this time is very important. That's something that I'm trying to offer as part of my consulting services, is working with organizations to make sure that they can reach survivors during this time. And then, you know, asking survivors when they are able to access public spaces and when theoretically they could make a call to someone to get some support. So are they allowed to leave the house? When might that happen? Could they make a phone call? What does that look like for them? And then the last ones are, if you do work in a shelter and, you know, maybe there was a case of the virus at your shelter, just being honest with folks who call and are seeking shelter and letting them know what's happening within your shelter. So I know I mentioned this on the former session, but I worked in a shelter where we had bed bugs. I mean, we did everything in the world to try to get rid of those bed bugs, and they just kept coming back. And so when folks would call, we were very upfront about what was happening. And some folks would decide to come into shelter, and others said, you know, that's not for me. But I think just, you know, being upfront with folks about what's happening and giving them the opportunity to make those choices is very important. And then the final recommendation is, you know, looking at the services that you currently offer and how you can be flexible to meet the needs of survivors given that this is going on. And I know that's a really loaded recommendation, but, you know, is it possible to extend length of stay? Are there times where you can be more flexible so that you can help survivors protect themselves? So that's a list of kind of COVID-specific safety planning strategies, just to think about as being different from, even a month or two ago. These are things that are of a higher priority. Okay, and I'm going to give you a minute to take those in and to let me know if there's any questions or any thoughts. You guys still out there? Okay. And I think okay, everyone's still there. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Perry. Very nice. All right. Okay, thank you. Gives me a chance to drink a sip of water too. Okie dokie. So we are going to move on now and talk a little bit about, this is a second suggestion on how to improve your safety planning. So I call this cycle breaker safety strategies. My friend Melissa Ewer, who some of you may know, calls this jawbreaker safety strategies. So she kind of gives me a hard time about these, but I thought it needed a name. So if after hearing about this, you all come up with a better name, please do put it in the chat or email me. But what this has to do with is that the majority of the safety planning strategies we tend to offer have to do with avoiding or mitigating the impacts of a physical assault. So if you think about strategies that you've used in the past, I'm guessing that some or most of us have used strategies like call 911, the old strategy about try not to get beat in a kitchen where there's sharp objects, trying to think some of the others that have to do with, make a code word so you can call a friend in case, physical violence erupts. So it is important to protect our clients physically, and I don't want you to think I'm saying anything other than that. At the same time, I think it is incumbent on us to also weigh how our clients have been impacted in many other areas and how important it is that they be well emotionally and spiritually as well as physically. And so, what I believe to be true is that if folks are compromised psychologically to such a degree that they think the abuse is their fault, that they somehow deserve it, or that it's on them to avoid it in some way, then if physical abuse erupts, if their offender becomes violent to them, chooses to become violent to them, even if they have a beautiful safety plan, they may not do any of the safety strategies. So sometimes folks need to heal psychologically before they can do anything to protect themselves. But with a lot of our traditional safety planning, again, we really focus on that physical event, and I think lose the opportunity to support survivors in those non-explosive moments when there's also a lot of abuse going on, and also a lot of what I call enticement. So enticement, and I did a TED Talk on enticement, and the link to my TED Talk is at the last slide on this PowerPoint. If you're interested, it's just 10 minutes. And so enticement, you already know what this is. It's when offenders look like they're being nice, and to some degree are being nice, but can also be used as a manipulation. Can also be used to keep an abusive relationship intact, and to kind of perpetuate the abuse. So I say, the traditional forms of abuse that we know of, like physical abuse or sexual abuse or threats, those are easy to identify potentially as being wrong or being hurtful. And they're kind of the stick, but the carrot is enticement. And so in the last session, some examples we gave of enticement would be gifts or promises, saying that you'll hurt yourself if the survivor leaves because you can't live without them, taking the kids to a ball game, proposing marriage. These are all things that are in keeping with an abusive relationship. It's not something that we often safety plan around. So I don't know if any of you have other examples of things that you've seen happen in abusive relationships that look nice, but you feel like were manipulative or harmful to the survivor's chances of ever getting out. Can you guys think of any other things that you've seen in your practice? And I'm going to ask Candace. She says, can you provide a mock example strategy for number 2? And we're going to get to some more of the concrete strategies. So Candace, if you still have that question at the end of the webinar, let's make sure you get that answered. But I think you may get that answer along the way. Did anyone have any other? Okay, good. Did anyone have any other examples of enticement, things offenders do that don't look abusive but perpetuate abusive relationships? Yeah, gifting, vehicle, comes with strings attached. Yep, vehicle in the abuser's name, that's a good one, right? Yeah, so again, a lot of safety planning that I've seen folks doing has to do with a physical event or the physical violence. And I think we can be preparing survivors for the more full totality of what they have faced and what they may face. Okay, so, and this last, number 4 is important. You know, we do need to prioritize our, let's see, bank account under the abuser's name. Yep, Anna. We do need to prioritize our client's safety. And physical abuse is shocking. And I want to say quality of life matters. So if we do safety planning, again, only around those physical safety items, and we neglect our client's quality of life, if their life is worse having left the offender than before they did, have we done them any favors? Are they likely to stay gone? And my answer to that would be no. So how are we addressing quality of life in equal measure as a way to ensure their safety, as a way to ensure that they get to make educated decisions and choice around either continuing or not continuing the relationship? So this bottom green part, I think, is relevant. Ask yourself if your safety planning helps the survivor be less likely to return to their offender, if it supports their health and happiness, if it makes them feel more confident, better about themselves and their abilities. If it doesn't do that, I don't think we're doing what we could be doing with our safety planning. I think we're missing opportunities if we don't accomplish this. So these are some examples of what I would consider to be cycle breaker safety planning, jawbreakers for Melissa if she's listening. And I'm guessing that some of them you're thinking, wait a minute, I've never put anything like that on a safety plan. And that's good, because I'd like you to think about putting these things on a safety plan, because these are the kinds of things that impact safety. And so this is just some examples, and I'm not going to go over all of them. You know, you can do that on your own time. We've got more examples coming. But these things address more than physical safety. They address emotional safety and wellness, spiritual safety and wellness, and quality of life. So we're on kind of safety planning improvement number 3, 3 out of 5. So we are we're hitting the midway point here. And this, I alluded to this before, but if we were to look at the power and control wheel together, and I'm sure most of you have seen the power and control wheel, there are a bunch of different types of abuse, right? And some of them are, have a physical component to them, but the majority of them do not. And offenders tend to use a mixture of tactics, usually what they learned as children, combined with what tends to work for a particular victim or survivor. And these strategies tend to overwhelmingly target survivors' emotional wellness. Even the physical components, I would put to you, even the physical violence has a primary emotional impact. So if you think about a very basic question of why do offenders hit, or or any of those types of physical violence, why do offenders do that? And just kind of breaking that down in your mind, it is a very effective method to teach someone that they are worthless, that they do not deserve protection, that they are less than, that they don't get to control their life. And if it didn't communicate those things, offenders would not hit. They would do something else. But these things, these types of abuse are there for a reason, and it's because they accomplish a certain goal of removing power from someone. And so how do we then kind of turn that back? How do we then pay attention to all of those methods that are being used and help survivors, partner with them so that they can reclaim all of that back into their life? And that's a heck of a thing to think about doing. But we can learn from offenders about how they accomplish the breaking down of people and come back with that same level of support in those very same areas where folks need that support. So I would submit to you that the type of safety planning that I think works, and I have used this with folks, is to look at those areas where a particular offender has focused with a particular survivor, identify that abuse was used, and then think of safety strategies that help build back that competence, that feeling of wholeness, that feeling of control within the survivor. And you should have received a PDF of this that looks better than the one you're seeing on the screen. But not all offenders use all the different types of abuse. Offenders tend to focus in a few areas that they learned when they were young and that work within the context of their relationship. So how do you turn from, say, the emotional abuse, which you'll see at the top, how do you turn that into emotional support and balance? How do you take the physical and sexual abuse potentially that was done and turn that into physical empowerment and health and safety? How do you take the child abuse that may have occurred and encourage the survivor to move toward their children being safe and loved and them being an engaged parent? How do you go from the isolation that may have been done to someone to helping them renew connection? So these are the flip sides of each of those coins. And this will help make your safety planning a lot more specific, a lot more directed, a lot more customized than if you had, the fill in the blank safety plan that that you're doing over and over and over again. But this type of safety planning needs conversation, needs discussion, needs partnership. You don't get to be able to fill this out unless you've really had kind of a rich discussion with someone. Maybe the most important piece on the safety plan is the middle of the safety plan, the middle of the donut. And so those are strategies for peace of mind, happiness, wellness, bright future. And when I was a case manager, I don't think I was ever encouraged to think in those terms. I was really thinking, how do we prevent the negative from happening to this person, not how do we promote the positive. And the positive outcomes that we can help promote with survivors are very important in helping them kind of have what it takes to keep on going down this road. If we can create some really good, rich, joyful moments for them, some of the bad stuff that's going to happen or the difficulties of leaving become more endurable. Is endurable a word? I don't know. Probably not. But easily endured. How about that? Anyway, and then some of you are, let's see, Johnny Trujillo wrote, many agencies are using a different safety plan to gauge offenders' likelihood to reoffend. That's good. And there's some products around lethality too. Trying to remember the name of the lethality tool I used to use that I still like, that'll help you gauge like how much the abuse is ramping up and dangerousness. Anyway, thank you, Johnny, for that. Okay, so here is our fourth. Oh, this is a part of still our third recommendation. Creating a menu of service. So a menu of service is super easy, super simple concept. I started using this as a case manager. It was really helpful. I think sometimes folks feel a lot of pressure to know of all the safety planning strategies and to just be able to rattle them off. So a menu of service takes that pressure off of you. And so what I did was create, well, I'll just show it to you. Here's some examples of a menu of service. This is not a complete menu of service. Your community would offer different opportunities, but it's broken down by the type of abuse and then all of the things that you might offer a survivor. And again, you're not choosing them for the survivor gets to pick. But just so you don't have to know all of this stuff offhand. I mean, I feel like that's overwhelming to think about. But so I organized what my community and what strategies I knew of that I might offer someone depending on the ways they had been harmed in the past, and organized it that way. And that was super helpful because then, you know, depending on what this person had faced, I could kind of go to my menu and offer some stuff that in the moment I probably would have forgotten, honestly. These are some, I wanted to have a slide specific to working with kiddos. Now, these are not specific to pandemic or to the health emergency that we're in now, the public health emergency we're in now. But, you know, I hated to go through a whole 3 total hours of safety planning strategies and not have something specific to children. And I know a lot of folks who signed up for this talk do have a background and are currently working with youth. So again, reiterating the point about kiddos didn't cause it, they can't control it. Oftentimes children really think that everything going on around them is about them, and that's developmental and that's good, unless something like this is happening, and then it puts an awful lot of pressure and stress on them. Talking to children about what they've done in the past to be safe, what they would like to do in the future to be safe, how to call for help, how to get out of the house if it's a child that's going to be living in a place with somebody who's abusive. places where the child feels safe, what they can do or think about during stressful events or when things get tense in the house. And then just like with the adults, like we just talked about, anything that's going to help build their resilience, their self-esteem, their self-care practices, all of that belongs on a safety plan. It helps them be safe. It helps them make good choices. It will help them grow into the kinds of adults who will have kind of intact abilities and not have potentially mental health issues. So that's just a little bit about, I mean, this probably deserves its own full training, but I did want to pass on a few thoughts to you. Okay, so we're on our next to last recommendation, and let's see, we're getting a little low on time, so I'm going to be pretty quick about this in case somebody has a question at the end. And again, feel free to put any questions in that you have that are coming up for you now. So that piece about enticement that we talked about earlier, that I have the TED Talk on, the majority of clients, I think all the clients I ever worked with, there was some enticement going on from the offender trying to keep them engaged in this relationship or draw them back into it. And on average, I think I may have told the first class, folks go back to an abusive relationship 7 times. That's not the least, that's not the most, that's just normal. So there is a lot of like calling the survivor back and the survivor really needing some support and some time and some opportunity to figure this out. Here are some examples of how you can help a survivor who's facing that kind of abuse, because there are some ways to help them solidify what they want for themselves and why they want it. And that's not easy to do when you have maybe friends and family pushing you back to that person. I've even seen where the spiritual care representative, you know, the clergy are telling you, you got to go back. I mean, there's a lot of messages in society that put folks at risk. And oftentimes not enough support saying, hey, this, you know, I'll help you. We can do something other than that. Okay. So this is a final recommendation, and I think it's very pertinent to the times we find ourselves in. So for a lot of survivors who are not able to leave their abusive situation right now, what can we offer them when, and I know a lot of offenders are home all day. They're home from work, and so everyone's in the same space, and what do we tell folks to help them be safer? I mean, we cannot offer 100% safety, particularly if everyone's in the same house together, but how do we, you know, help that survivor keep their spirit alive? And it's up to the survivor when these strategies are safe to use. And I call them subtle tactics because there's things that they can do while the offender's in the room. They can do them in their head. Let's see what those are. So again, a lot about keeping that survivor in connection with others as much as possible. The opportunity to talk back to the offender in your head, even if it's not something you're going to say to their face, you can still say in your head, that's not right, you shouldn't treat me that way, I am worth more than this. All of those things to kind of reinforce your self-esteem. Any of these kind of behaviors like singing or playing an instrument, going for a walk, doing some artwork, exercise is huge. I know in the last class we were all talking about what we're doing to kind of keep our nervous system regulated, and a lot of folks saying yoga and exercise, and then kind of exerting these muscles of choice or being able to think critically. In my work with survivors, I've seen a lot of times where I know there was one survivor I was working with, and she had forgotten what she liked to eat because she had been told what to make, and she had never, well, in a long time, she hadn't even, you know, derived any pleasure from eating. And she had forgotten what it was like to go to the grocery store and pick something she liked and really enjoy a meal. And so, you know, encouraging folks to exert small choices when appropriate, and kind of taking time around that and not losing the ability to make choice. And then some of these last ones, like nurturing your body, staying in your body, you know, putting on lotion. I mean, I know some of these seem maybe even a little silly, but, you know, to keep someone grounded and in their body and able to, when the time comes, potentially make a different choice, these are things that really work. And they work for people across centuries. You know, passive resistance, meditation. I mean, these are things that oppressed people have done to keep their spirit alive, to keep their hope alive. So I think these are things that can work for us now too. All right, and we just have about a minute or so left. So there are some challenges to doing the work this way. I think there's also some real benefit to making safety planning meaningful and partnering in this way with our clients. But I know for many of you, and for me 10 years ago, this would have been a real shift in thinking. So I hope you get to take some time with this PowerPoint. If you have any, there's additional resources here. If you have any questions, or if your organization is interested in you know, some additional services from my business, I'm super open to that. I really appreciate your time. I'm sorry we weren't together in person. I would have liked that more. But yeah, thank you so much for the work you're doing. And if I can be of assistance, please let me. This is the book that I wrote, really, on safety planning, and it's available on Amazon.
And before everybody leaves, I do also want to add that we will be sharing the PowerPoint again for those who missed it, as well as the recording. If you guys are interested on the first recording, I can definitely send that to you. If you want to give me a couple days, I need to edit it. And also, I will be sending a survey for what you guys think about the event and the webinar. And if you guys can give us that feedback, it would be greatly appreciated. And if you have any more questions or concerns, please feel free to email training@nmcadv.org, or you can also email me, Terry@nmcadv.org, and I'll go ahead and put that in the chat box.
Oh, thank you all so much for your responses. I really appreciate it.
Yes, Carlos, I can go ahead and send you both recordings. All right, everybody. Well, you guys have a great day. And if I will be sending both recordings, it looks like a couple of you do want both, and I'll be sending the slides as well. And if you guys need anything else, like I said, just go ahead and email me at training@nmcadv.org. And thank you guys so much again. And I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, there will be some certificates that I will be sending out. So if you did attend the full session, you will be getting a certificate for attendance. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Take care.